Welcome to day 4 of the Business Excellence Leaders Program. Okay, we're going to have 3 sessions plus the last quiz, so this is the last day of the course. What you're going to see here is we're going to talk a little bit about the consensus process, site visit planning, and then we're going to talk about some of the more specific things associated with safety and the climate change areas. But in this case, the last day of the course, let's take some time. You're going to take some time with the class up front with one of the buzz slides here. Just says here, so what are your thoughts about the TBEM assessment process so far? We've basically taken them through the process steps of doing assessment, both for process items and for results items. So they've done it a couple times here, spent a great deal of time on their tables, and so this is kind of that open conversation about the process. So to a certain extent, you should be asking for how people might suggest that the process itself be improved, or where they think it's particularly good. So get some strengths and OFIs on the TBEM assessment process itself. Good material to have. Okay, now we put them back in the context of what the overall process is, so that they can see that we've stepped through the independent review things, and we've started to talk about the site visit activity. And so we're now telling them that we're getting into that place where we are pulling the teams together and going to do some consensus, more teamwork kinds of stuff. So the consensus process gets in here, where we are talking about moving from that individual work where we wanted them to have that critical eye. And when I say critical, I mean that we want them to be thoughtful about what they're doing. They're both looking critically for good things as well as for opportunities for improvement. So seeking out both strengths and OFIs. Okay, so now we're saying, so what is this consensus stuff? Is consensus voting? What is this? What might they expect to see during a consensus activity? Ask people a little bit about, what do they think the difference is between, say, consensus and compliance, or consensus and compromise? You can have some conversations there. Okay, now we're talking here about giving them specifics about what they might be seeing when they enter into towards the site visit stage of their TBEM journey. This will be talking now about how each individual, or certainly most individuals on a team, will be assigned to be a category lead. And that will give certain specific responsibilities. We want them to understand what those responsibilities are for category leadership. So this is an example of a grid that shows how a member may be assigned to one category and then to potentially a somewhat related results item. Just also note that although this is showing here as though it's a kind of a rule, it is an example, and the way the category or item leadership will be assigned often is based upon the background of the person. So it is not too unusual for there to be multiple people assigned to a category, that maybe one person would be more oriented towards item 6.1 and another person might be oriented more towards item 6.2, and the team leader can make those kind of options as far as where they think that the leadership for a particular item is most useful. Okay, and now we're starting to give them examples of what they might see when they're trying to do consolidation. And so you're just giving you examples here, plenty of examples of what team members might have written as strength comments, whatever. And now we're saying, so how would you take all of that? How would you take 8 of those comments and turn them into something that actually seemed to summarize the most important pieces of what you were seeing in all those other areas? So this is an example of how this was pulling together the materials that came from the other ones. Now what we do want that although this kind of reads a bit like it's combining all the things we saw before, it's important for us to let the category or the item lead know that what they're writing is a comment that represents the best thinking of the group. So we expect them to do what we call synthesizing, that they take all the inputs and then they rewrite themselves, with that knowledge on board, into something that holds together as a single common, or as a single thought. So it is not just concatenate together what everyone else said. This is not a combining process. This is a learning from your team members and expressing that learning in the way in which you write comments on what appear to be the key things as identified by the overall set of the people who have been doing this assessment. Okay, more talk about what consensus is, and further on to there, so certainly spend the time to do that. And then we talk about the consensus matrix, which is intended to make sure that people are aware that each item lead will have read everything that came in and will have determined what were the main thoughts behind all of that, and they'll write comments for the main thoughts that they think are the most important, the ones to be brought forward as the key area. But they should also write things for the other thoughts that maybe they didn't think would have gone into that 6 to 8 area. Still good stuff, but maybe that they would not have been ones that we would have wanted to have spent as much time in, say, doing a site visit issue to verify or clarify those particular ones. That's what we call below the line. Different teams can do this different ways. Some teams just take all of the comments made by everyone and put them either to be included in something that would be written into a go-forward feedback comment that would be site visit issued, versus another set of things that they did not include in those particular ones. So that's the above the line. Below the line. Below the line is basically intended to say that we respect our fellow team members, and that's a way of showing respect, so that we in fact show that we did look at what they had put forward, and that this is the acknowledgement of that. Okay, and then the specifics about consensus deliverables, and then we start to talk about key themes. So consensus deliverables basically are saying that now we have a team together, we end up creating the same deliverable that we did in the previous 2 days of the course, only now it's just one set of those for the entire team, as opposed to one for each individual assessor. Now we talk about the key themes, which is again trying to bring together and synthesize the large level thinking of the group. And to some extent, we're trying to let people know, why would you even write key themes? You know, this is something that ends up being an awfully high-level viewpoint. And so this is saying, well, that high-level viewpoint, you do have reasons that you want to use that. In this particular case, we're talking about the CEO applicant. The CEOs tend to look at the key theme areas most. Now, one thing that you want to bring forward in the class now is that under the go-forward guidance for the TBEM process, whatever the feedback is that the team is doing will also be presented to the board of directors for the company that you're doing the assessment on. So the board of directors tends to also be a group that will focus in on the key themes pieces of it. So being able to kind of summarize the most important pieces of the entire assessment process is useful, and key themes are a way to do that. So here's some questions that are used from the Blue Book that help, that are the basic paragraph items to say, what are these key themes, those key themes. So the first two are about process items, and then presumably those are usually going over to the third of which is the result item key theme, and those are paragraphed as A, B, and C. Again, more talk about what key themes are, and in this case we are now showing you what the key themes were written for Colin, so this will let them see an example of key themes as applied to the case study that they have themselves gone through. So you can look at that and spend as much time as you wish to looking at it and seeing whether people have questions about those. Otherwise, this is just sharing that information. Okay, that brings us to a potential break, and then we're on to session 14, so the midday of the last day, talking about site visit planning and kind of trying out what it would be like to be on a site visit. Again, trying to put this in context with the assessment process diagram, and this is saying you now need to prioritize site visit issues. Now, one of the things you'll see on this slide is we have the statement saying target around 60 site visit issues to be focused on. That's 60 for the entire team. That's not, 60 for my item. We really need to get people to focus in on a very few number of site visit issues and do a good job when you're at the site in understanding what the responses are and the current state of the things that are affected by those site visit issues. So in this case, we're saying that you would want to take a look at your site visit issues and say which of those are the higher priority ones, the ones you definitely want to make sure that you have fully investigated when you're on site versus medium or low. Okay, so we go and use the site visit matrix, and this is where you can take a look at the site visit issues and you start to classify, well, we've already classified a bit about whether they were high, medium, or low. Now you start to say, who would I want to talk to about those particular site visit issues? And so in this case, you're seeing that we're starting to lay in the applicant's organization chart. And so this is part of that site visit planning, is ensuring that we are that the team gets a chance to talk to the people who are most relevant for the questions that we have. This is pretty important to get this done as early as we can to get over to the the applicant's organization, because they're the ones that are going to be arranging for the meetings and scheduling people's time. So the earlier they get this information, the more successful you're going to be in having enough time with the right people to get your questions answered. Okay. And then there's just multiple types of ways in which we're able to investigate things when we're on site. So that's a list here, plus the final one of walk-around questions, which is there's some things that you might just want to check with a lot of people. And so as a team, you'll end up, you want to make sure that people know that there is these things called walk-around questions that the team can share and ask each other to ask the general population. One thing you might want to introduce here is that there's some activity you want to do during the site visit that says that when a site visit issue is cleared, make sure people know about it so they don't keep asking questions even though you already have enough information to have answered the question that you actually need. So there's communication necessary across the team to ensure that you're not spending more time asking questions than you need in order to get the outcome you're targeting. Okay, and so key points for consensus, what kind of things do you want to make sure that you're doing as far as what turns into a site visit issue from a consensus area. So this is closing those things together, and in this particular case you see that list over on the right and then the answers just appear in bold on the left. So this is not one where we have the answers flow over, mainly because these are phrases and so they don't really fly around very easily, hence you see the way that we're showing it there. Okay, and so going back into their table areas here, actually this is not necessarily a table exercise, but it's a role play exercise. It's where we want to have people have the opportunity to pretend to be put in a situation where they're asking questions and then have somebody else play the role of the person inside of the applicant, of how would you then be responding to the kinds of questions that are being asked.